today I want to highlight several recent media reports uncovering very serious errors and possible fraud by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Let me first of all define what we're talking about here, because it's been around for a long time, but a lot of them have forgotten. Way back in 1988, the United Nations formed the Ipcc, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The whole idea was that to try to determine whether or not man-made gases, anthropogenic gases, CO2, methane, caused global warming, and if in fact global warming is taking place. It's kind of hard on a day like today, in the last few days, to be talking about global warming. I often say, where is it when you need it? But nonetheless, for right now, you need to know just three things about the Ipcc. Number one, the Obama administration calls it the gold standard of climate change science. Number two, some say its reports on climate change represent the so-called consensus of scientific opinion about global warming. And three, the Ipcc and Al Gore were awarded the Nobel Prize in 2007 for their, quote now, their efforts to build up and disseminate greater knowledge about man-made climate change. Put simply, what this means is that in elite circles, the Ipcc is a big deal. So when ABC News, The Economist, the Time Magazine, and the Times of London, among many others, report that the Ipcc's research contains embarrassing flaws, and that the Ipcc chairman and scientists knew of the flaws but published them anyway, well, you have the makings of a major scientific scandal. In fact, when the Climate Gate first came out and it was discovered that they had been cooking the science at the Ipcc, the UK Telegraph said, this is very likely the greatest scientific scandal of our generation. So where to begin? Well, how about with the Ipcc's claim that the Himalayan glaciers would melt by 2035? It's not true. That's right. It's simply false. Yet it was put into the Ipcc's fourth assessment report. Now, these assessment reports, every year they come out with these assessments. That's what the media normally get. They're not scientific reports. They are assessments that are made for policymakers. And here's what we know. According to the Sunday Times, the claim about the Himalayas was based on, now keep in mind, we're talking about their statement that by 2035, the glaciers would melt. According to the Sunday Times, that claim was based on a 1999 story in the news magazine, which in turn was based on a short telephone interview with someone named Syed Hassan. It was a very little known, not very well known Indian scientist. Next, in 2005, the activist group World Wildlife Fund cited the story in one of its climate change reports, yet despite the fact that the World Wildlife Fund report was not peer-reviewed, was not scientifically peer-reviewed, it was still referenced by the Ipcc. It's still in their report. And third, according to the Times, the Himalayan glaciers are so thick and at such high altitude that most glaciologists believe they would take several hundred years to melt at the present rate. Some are actually growing, and many show no or little signs of change. And lastly, when the finally published, the Sunday Times wrote, quote, the Ipcc report did give its source as the World Wildlife Fund study, but went further, suggesting the likelihood of the glaciers melting was very high. The Ipcc, by the way, defines this as having a probability of greater than 90%. So there you have that. But there's more. According to the Times, the chairman, Pachari, now he's the chairman of the Ipcc, the lead scientist of the climate change watchdog, was informed that claims about melting Himalayan glaciers were false before the Copenhagen summit. We all remember the Copenhagen summit. It was in the middle of December. I was there for 2 hours. Many were there for 2 weeks. But he was informed that the information on these glaciers was false prior to that summit, and yet the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment that the glaciers would disappear by 2035 was wrong, but he waited 2 months to correct it. He failed to act despite learning that the claim had been refuted by several leading glaciologists. So why was the